All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming today to our kickoff UpGuard session. We're definitely excited to get this series of events rolling for everybody, where we touch on a variety of subjects that are going to be very pertinent, helpful, or otherwise just really fun for some of us practitioners of not just cybersecurity, not just governance, risk, and compliance, but even more specifically, taking a lean at the supply chain house of that landscape. And so today's inaugural session is all about automating third-party risk management, why it's valuable, why it's important, how some of us have already seen the impacts of not automating this, and moving forward, if we're not already doing this, then how can we get started? So very excited and eager to get this rolling for us on this very quick 30-minute session. So a little bit about myself. My name is Alex Nunez. I am UpGuard's competitive intelligence analyst. Whatever that means. A little more specifically, I've been working in this space for about 7 years now. And across these years, I have had the opportunity to work with hundreds of chief information security officers and other information security and risk leaders, specifically helping provide a consultative approach and partnership approach towards solving this problem of third-party risk and obviously those information security implications that come out of that. And so I'm very passionate about this space and subject, and I'm hoping that anything I can share might be helpful in any of your endeavors as well. As far as UpGuard, the company that I have the distinct pleasure of working for on a day in, day out basis, really at its core, UpGuard's mission is to help enterprises build resilient supply chains. And that is going to extend not just to that tippy top of the enterprise commercial sector, but even that small business, small, medium enterprise segment. We have a lot of experience and success, not just working with these companies, but also really partnering with them on a day in, day out, year in, year out basis, helping them mature and evolve their risk management practices. And so you can see some of the organizations that we've been able to work with here amongst many. And so we really are, I would say for sure, a leader in this whole premise of third-party risk and supply chain management. So again, I'm sure everyone is already this whole headlines about breaches. Probably you've seen it on so many sales decks. It's a little nauseating at this point. Totally feel you on that. But it obviously was, it's worth repeating in the sense that every single incident is an opportunity for us to learn more about what to do, what not to do, and understand how even these attackers are evolving within this whole problem of supply chain risk. And so very recently we have seen, again, even non-commercial organizations suffer from these impacts. Illuminate, which is a large provider of services for a significant amount of our public school districts here in the country, recently, just this year, actually had an incident where, as a supplier to these school districts, they compromised the private information of one of the most protected populations in our country, children, and with the amount of limited resources that these school districts already have, the backward-facing audit and the kind of risk that these protected children are now put in, and the resource intensivity of having to do that backward audit, definitely creating a significant amount of not just financial pain, but even operational pain, right? And on the commercial side, just this year, in terms of high concentration risk and having one organization that is extremely common to many of us in this technology space, if one of their suppliers gets compromised, and they're a supplier to us as well, then that's almost compounding this whole problem of supply chain kind of inception almost of the kind of risk that we're susceptible to. And so, as many of us already know, Okta, I believe it was their vendor Sitel, were compromised by the hacker group Lapsus, and that opened the door into Okta, which then opened the door into multiple of their customers. And so this problem is starting to kind of get kind of like those Russian dolls, one within another. How do you understand which supplier was the supplier, which one wasn't? Blame gets tossed around. So it can become not just a problem in terms of real security terms and business issue, but also even within the interrelational space, just creating a lot of headaches, a lack of trust in general. And that's not really the kind of commercial or technological environment that we want to be operating in. Now, as far as the business implications themselves, this is already pretty established, but it is very appreciated for sure that organizations like IBM and the Ponemon Institute, I believe they run this survey yearly because I've been seeing it for many years now. But I believe every year they're calculating what's the average cost of data breach in the United States, and I've been seeing this number tick up every year, and it looks like now it's being pegged at $4.35 million. And so for many organizations, that cost is almost existential. And for other organizations of a much larger size, it's definitely a lot more economical, if you will, to actually address the core issue than to have to encounter these costs unexpectedly. However, correspondingly, on the other side of that, for organizations that aren't trying to tackle this problem at the root through direct investment, sometimes I've heard of organizations just going to an insurer and trying to insure themselves against that risk. Well, unfortunately, large supply chain attacks that have been going on, and even other incidents like the Colonial Pipeline breach, the Russo-Ukrainian war, have started to increase this cost of cyber insurance premiums, as reported in the Wall Street Journal recently, I believe. And so this path itself is increasingly becoming a lot more expensive. And when you factor in the fact that regulators are responding with an increasing amount of regulations, CCPA, NYDFS 500, this whole acronym alphabet soup of new laws that we're having to basically keep tabs on, put operational costs onto our business, that's causing us to go and look for these efficiency gains, look for people that we can work with, people we can trust, vendors we can trust. But if they're getting hit as well, then that creates a whole other issue about even how do we trust these suppliers? When is that trust breached if they don't report their incidents for months on end, or don't even know they had one, right? And so this whole ecosystem of suppliers, of us needing suppliers but not being able to trust them, is creating a pretty dicey situation in terms of our ability to actually conduct our business in an efficient manner. And so for us being able to actually move beyond this space, right, move beyond those implications, or at least minimize the impact of them, it's imperative that we find ways to gather efficiency in our practice of managing this risk. And so for us, as professionals in the space, we know already that automation is going to be really the only way that we can actually do this successfully for our business. And there's a few reasons why. Obviously, the amount of security talent out there, that supply of security professionals, is absolutely currently not keeping up with the demand. We ourselves ran a survey of our own customers and other potential customers, and we found that an average security team is only about 10 people, but the organization sizes that they're supporting are far, far larger. And so in terms of being able to secure an organization of many more people, that leverage factor is a bit off. However, we still have to be dependent on these SaaS suppliers, right? We're not the only professionals or departments in our companies looking to gain efficiency. You know, marketing needs to do things faster, sales needs to do things faster, engineering needs to do things faster, and we're essentially looking to other providers to be able to outsource this and become a lot more efficient. And that's going to mean that they're bringing on a lot more vendors, a lot more suppliers into that supply chain, and we have to understand what's going on there. And that's going to create a much higher burden of proof. Customers want to know what we're doing to secure that supply chain. Insurers want to know. Regulators want to know. And it's no longer, okay to just say, hey, we're looking into it. It's an expectation now. And with this crowded landscape of vendors sending us 10 sales emails a day saying, hey, we've got the solution that's gonna stop you from getting breached. It's really easy to overspend through oversight and overkill that limited budgetary resource that we have. And so in order to be able to really automate effectively, we have to know what we're looking for. And so what we've really developed is a 3-step process to help you understand what are the core functionalities that you ought to be looking for to automate third-party risk management. That's going to keep your budget in line. That's going to be able to give your people the amount of extra power they need to be able to do their job effectively and ultimately secure the business. And so first step in that is you've got to target that low-hanging fruit. So in terms of automation, every supplier has a certain amount of public-facing, internet-facing, sometimes people call it like a digital footprint, attack surfaces, what have you. Every organization worth their salt has a public-facing presence on the internet. And not only can you see it with the right tool set, but definitely attackers are able not just to see this, but they're actively searching for these risks and entry points and vulnerabilities. And so your ability to be able to scan all of your suppliers and understand, do they have RDP ports randomly and unnecessarily open, SSL certification in place, what redirects do they have? Are they keeping up with their, DNS registrations and such? All of this information is going to give you insight into kind of that general hygiene attention that they're paying, if not also give you some indication of very important risks that you ought to be looking out for. And actually, part of that is going to be informed by how well you're mapping out and defining your risk tolerance, not just for any one single type of risk, but for risk categories as a whole. So being able to understand for yourselves, reflect and understand what are the risks that we can and can't tolerate, that's going to help you then set some form of rules, trigger, policy to be able to get alerted on the dot when your supplier does have some sort of change that creates one of these intolerable risks. You'll be able to actually know on the spot and engage your suppliers and reduce or remediate that risk in a real term and within a timely manner. Now, step 2, probably the most painful one, to be honest. Everyone on this call is probably pretty familiar with the painful experience of security questionnaires. They are on Excel, sometimes even worse, on Word documents. And it's just been a terrible way of understanding security amongst ourselves, right? Now, the reason why we're doing this is a very good one. We really want to have some form of security attestation from our suppliers, right? We want to be able to know, hey, you guys said that you had this level of security, you had this control in place. Here's the documentation that you sent us, and it turns out that wasn't the case. Well, we might have to seek relief in other manners, right? But if there's no documentation to actually highlight that attestation, then the business might have a much harder time, if not impossible time, getting that relief. So being able to automate that piece of the puzzle is definitely going to be one of the most time-saving steps you can take. And then also being able to find a way to collate and integrate that external kind of third party or fourth party, if you will, again, kind of, again, supplier inception. But, we have organizations that are looking at not just us, but our vendors in terms of like SOC 2 audits, pen test reports, bug bounties. These are key pieces of evidence that we want to know. And we need to be able to pull risks right out of those external pieces of evidence and ultimately have one way where we can centralize all of the risks that we've identified from that external view, from the questionnaire view, from this certification perspective, and within a few clicks, be able to actually produce and generate the ultimate work product, which is a report that says, hey, here is our risk assessment for this vendor. Here's the steps we took to understand that risk. And here is why we are confident that this vendor will meet our security guidelines and we approve this supplier. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're looking to do is to approve vendors by doing these security assessments and be a lot more timely and effective and efficient in doing that. So having that automated way of, not just automating the process, but automating the collation and production of the work product, that's a step that is often overlooked, but very, very critical. And finally, step 3, we've all heard that old adage, hey, don't just trust, but verify. The UpGuard take on that is don't just automate the trust, which would be that step 1, step 2 piece, but automate the verification. So in this kind of scenario, imagine you assess a vendor today and you approve them and all is great. And then tomorrow they, for just example, have some sort of data loss incident that exposes some of your business data, whether it be in the dark web, in the public web, in the deep web, wherever it may be. If there's no way for either yourselves to know that has happened, or if your suppliers, as is often the case, aren't really thinking to look, not because of being malicious or anything like that, just people aren't really thinking about what they don't know they should be thinking about, right? Then I know personally I've seen instances where I've worked with customers where they've had functional and active passwords that have been just tossed out on the internet for 3 to 5 years. And so this can really be a hairball when it comes to understanding, if there's ever been any incident that came out of from that, right? More importantly, you want to be empowered in these vendor relationships, right? So you want to be able to know, hey, like supplier, you did unfortunately, have an exposure of my data. Here's the record. Here's how it happened. What can we do to move past this? What can we do to work with you on this? And ultimately, being in that proactive, empowered step of knowing is far superior to just going blind. More importantly as well, you want to make sure that any remediation processes are definitely collaborative along those lines. And so quite often, I've seen, a customer of ours have solutions in place that allow them to pull a report, and then they just send that report to the supplier, and then the supplier doesn't really know what to do with it. It's really important that not only are you empowering yourself to automate the remediation of these critical risks, but also make life easy on your vendor side, not just to be nice, although it's nice to be nice, but because it really makes it that much more likelier that you are going to get that issue resolved. And so keep that suppliers through that process. And finally, being able to have your board and executive leadership empowered as well. They need to verify what's going on as well. So being able to have some impactful, timely, concise reporting that can be produced, whether it's on a recurring and automated manner, that your executive leadership can consume to inform and guide their strategy. That's not only going to be really good for the business, but it also make you guys look really good, make all of us look really good, and get more money in this whole little space. So we want to make sure that we're looking good, doing good, and empowering not just ourselves, not just our vendors, but the business leaders as well. So those are the 3 steps. In terms of what that would look like from a actual solution perspective, it's like, oh, all these steps, like, is there anyone actually out there doing this today? Well, coincidentally, yes, UpGuard, us, we are doing that today. So UpGuard bringing that step 1 attack surface management component for that public facing, risk monitoring. That's going to be that core capability. The security assessment and due diligence piece definitely contained in the offering. Really going to help you automate the questionnaire piece, the external evidence collation, and the production of reports. Want to make sure we're helping you guys fly right through those vendor approvals. And that third component of data leak management, making sure that if your suppliers or if just generally your data becomes exposed on the public, deep, or dark web, you are able to get that back in your own control and proactively work with your suppliers, build those strong relationships and supply chains. And finally, making sure that your executives are being informed with the appropriate reporting in a timely and impactful manner, so that we can all ultimately not just automate this third-party risk, but also be able to manage it effectively. So I think that's going to be it for the UpGuard component. Definitely keen on taking any questions as they come. Feel free to drop them in the Q&A tab. Seems we have a question about questionnaires and the potential value for acquisitions. Definitely invite a little more specificity to that. In the meantime, definitely I know that in terms of like the mergers and acquisitions, there's a significant component of that is just straight up due diligence. Definitely, I have worked with customers who have inherited a breach and didn't know it. Significant incidents have actually happened that way. And so as far as customizing a questionnaire, if there is a kind of specific, approach that your organization is taking to merger and acquisition due diligence, then definitely the customized questionnaires are going to be a good way for you guys to be able to kind of automate that custom piece. One of the things I would definitely say around mergers and acquisitions is if you are only working off of a custom approach to get that security due diligence out of the way, you might want to consider pairing it with an assessment that does look at a established framework, something like ISO 27K1, NIST. This is going to be a really good way of just getting that like broad scope sense of how they're securing themselves. You want to look for that external validation as well, bug bounties, pen tests. But for anything that's specific to how you approach it or how your business is approaching mergers and acquisitions, you definitely want to, you can definitely use a custom questionnaire and automate that workflow. Yeah, so in terms of another question, speaking a little bit to, what's like the way I'm reading this, what's the value of this for a kind of legal, financial, C-suite type of user? So in terms of legal and finance, they obviously have this, kind of governance or kind of compliance side that is very important to the business, but isn't in the same kind of vein as security or IT risk would approach it. But the worlds are kind of converging. So for example, DPOs, data privacy officers, really seem to be that current convergence point between where legal and information security start to kind of like merge. So from a legal perspective, definitely, this kind of risk management approach when they're thinking about how are we complying with some of these regulations, continental regulations, or multinational businesses in particular, have a hard time with being able to grapple with the emerging and established regulations out there. This is going to be one of those ways that you can definitely assess a vendor for any number of these regulations. So definitely, so far I've seen it be too much, kind of in purely finance terms. The procurement side is a bit more about risk management, but currently I do see a lot of partnership with security. So it's rare still. This could change, but so far it's still kind of rare that we see purely procurement people or finance people looking at a solution like this. Often they're working with like an Ariba or something like that. and having their workflows run through that, and then our security partner will integrate some view from a platform like UpGuard into that system, and then that's often how I see this kind of working out. So it seems we may be up on questions. Cool. Going once, going twice. All right. Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Definitely excited to take this my morning, your guys maybe afternoon, wherever you may be. So signing off now. Thanks for checking out UpGuard, and goodbye.